Chapter 8. The Ache from the Acres. The structured lines of the desks were of no avail. The strong voice of the teacher could not suffice. Even the children around him, each having given up on their taking special notice of the new kid he represented to them, looking toward the same area of the room where the teacher read from a book for them to hear the stories of the talking cat in the Chinese emperor's throne room, did nothing to help Manny keep his attention from wandering to the memory still in his muscles of rigorously toting buckets of citrus through the dusty lanes of the orchard. He wanted to focus and follow what the teacher was saying. The story seemed to cause his classmates to giggle in unison at times, and he would voice a slight sound so to not be excluded. But he did not know what the antics of the feline were, and why they should cause him to laugh. His body was unaccustomed to the sitting, and it told him this long period of rest was unhelpful. His brain would listen to his body and start to do exercises of imagination. Words would lead to thoughts, thoughts would lead to stories, stories would lead to images, and images to daydreams of the highest order. He could feel himself atop the crane, or piloting one of the large vehicles used to pave the street, which he had seen when walking to school earlier. All of those tasks would have him sitting too, but he would be sitting someplace where he could be using his body to form the world into something new. He dreamed with eyes wide open of the kind of vibrations he would feel coursing through his body as the machine he controlled followed his commands. He imagined the smell of the exhaust blowing a hot wind all around him, swirling his dark hair as he made things with his strength and expertise in handling the automated tools. His body yearned to be active, and sitting in this classroom was doing little more than augmenting that yearning to near excruciating heights. "Pardon the interruption," a disembodied voice rang into the classroom. The teacher ceased speaking and cocked his head as though giving attention to some being of the ethers that was hovering close to the ceiling. "Do you have Emmanuel Ochoa in the room?" "Yes, we do," the teacher replied with a nod toward Manny as the other students looked toward him. "Please send him to the front office," the womanly voice asked. "He will be on his way," the teacher said, and there was an audible click over the intercom. The teacher opened the book back up and motioned to Manny. With the eyes of his classmates still on him, he felt the nervousness of uncertainty as he rose and walked to the door. He did not think he had done anything wrong, and he had not lied to any teacher or done anything to any student. This was his first day, and he thought that he may have gone to the wrong classroom. Maybe they decided that he was too big or too smart for this class and wanted to put him into another class. Maybe this class was full, and they didn't realize it until he was in there. His mind was whirling the possibilities, and he barely noticed walking from the room as he heard the teacher's voice continue the story. He walked through the hallway toward the office and wondered if he was in trouble. If the school found out that he had lived with his grandparents, would they be upset? Maybe they wanted to give him all the work he had missed during the first 2 weeks. Maybe they wanted to tell him that he would never catch up, or what if he had to go through a louse check? Maybe they gave the wrong name. That had to be it. His name was still on the lady's desk from the form he handed in this morning, and when they had to call for the student who had done whatever terrible thing that was done, she just looked at the name on the first paper on her desk. He had nothing to worry about. Abuelo would tell him what was going on. He stopped walking not far from the office when he saw Abuelo standing outside of the room. Pointing to Manny while looking into the office, he said, "He is here. Sign out okay?" "Yes, you are all good to go," the womanly voice spoke from within the office. "You just sign him back in here when done, and I will be praying and hoping for the best. Gracias," Abuelo said, and waved into the office with one hand while waving Manny forward toward him with the other. Manny picked up his pace and was quickly by Abuelo's side. The large and heavy hand of his grandfather rested on his shoulder, and they walked past the office where Manny saw the lady with the voice wave at him with a concerned expression on her face. Confusion squarely on his face, Manny waved back and looked ahead to where he was being led. "Do I need he almost asked. "You back today. We just want you to know," was the reply that trailed off as Abuelo thought better of it. "I want you to know," he restated. "They want to not tell and hide it from you, but no more." "'Kay," barely managed to come out of Manny's voice before his grandfather answered again. "You are going to be a brother, Manny." Manny looked from his grandfather to ahead where he saw the old car and his grandmother inside. "Mama is pregnant and had to go to the hospital today." Manny choked back a sudden and overwhelming fear and sadness. "She okay?" "She's fine, but she fell in the field, so Papa brought her to the hospital." "She is fine," Abuela said while opening the door. "Mama is fine, Papa is fine, and yes, little baby is fine." The baby?" Manny was climbing into the back seat, somewhat dumbfounded, but still able to speak. Is it a boy or girl?" "The baby is still in Mama," she said while returning the seat to its position and sitting. She closed the door just as Abuelo was starting the car. He was tense, and a mixture of emotion and information which he barely had words to describe or understand flooded Manny. His ideas of the future seemed so distant, and his pondering of the past was long gone. This was a warped sense of time and distance that he experienced while traveling south, in the back seat of Abuelo's car. Abuelo spoke most, and so much information about how their family was made. An incredible amount of information that Manny had never even thought of before was made known in a short span of time. And how her body had carried his father after the contribution from Abuelo would have been unbelievable if she did not mention that he was so much smaller then, just a baby himself. To make the explanation as accurate as possible, Abuelo chimed in with precise information regarding how Manny's daddy came to be in Abuela's tummy. He detected a discomfort from Abuela when the conversation was interrupted, but the discomfort evaporated in the moment when Abuelo asked her to verify what he was telling the young boy. Faced with the responsibility of giving the truth to her grandson, she shrugged off her embarrassment and bothered temperament, let go of the trouble of nuances and problematic phrasing, and delved into the best description of procreative sex and the body's functions during pregnancy that she could muster. Manny watched his grandfather's eyes in the rearview mirror go from the road to his wife to Manny. Sometimes his eyebrows would quizzically glance at Abuela as though she was speaking information that was new to him as well. Sometimes he looked at Manny with a certainty in his stare that accentuated the importance of what Abuela was telling him. And sometimes, on only a few occasions early in her monologue, Manny saw Abuelo glance at her with a look upon his face that meant something Manny could not recognize at first. He remembered seeing it upon his grandfather's face on one other occasion, when he and Abuelos had finished a dinner one night. The last amount of the queso fundido remained in the iron pan, with its 2 cheeses melted around the red pepper and mushroom slices that were saturated with the grease from the beef. Abuelo had taken the last tortilla and arranged a bed of shredded lettuce upon it, surrounded by diced pieces of tomatoes that he pulled from the small bowl in which they had rested. A dusting of dried serrano atop the watery green tendrils, and then the scoop of the queso. The mass emanating a last gasp of steam from deep within its folds that carried the strong sting of garlic to be wafted to the air. Abuelo had used the spoon to mash the mass even, placed the spoon in the pan, and wrapped both edges of the tortilla up to encapsulate the entire delicacy. Before lifting it to his mouth, he had paused and looked at it in his hand, with the same expression Manny had seen him look at Abuela with, as she described how babies were made. Somewhere in the back of his mind, noting that look of desire, Manny knew that he would one day reference this moment when trying to make sense of love between a man and a woman. At the front of his mind, he was trying to make sense of why all this information was necessary. The words became bigger, and Abuelo looked mostly at the road. He wondered if how he heard his father call his mother sweetheart had anything to do with the sugar in her blood that Abuela was trying to explain to him. He wondered about the way he would run around when he had sugar, and if that was what could make his mother's blood run around fast or slow, as his grandfather interjected. It was very confusing, and he only understood that they wanted to be sure that Mama's blood speed didn't get clampsy, or it could be really bad. But that was not a big worry. She just had a diabetic episode which sounded like she was watching television while not eating. He almost laughed at the thought of her fainting from something on television that she would watch only when he was not around, like any of the stories that she said were not for him. But the laughter would not erupt. He knew the idea was ridiculous, and it was something in his brain only because he did not understand. His grandparents were trying to explain it to him, and he knew they were doing their best, but he just did not understand what was happening. He knew his mother was in the hospital and that she would be in big trouble, or not. They told him that she was fine, but people only go into the hospital when they are very not fine. Hence she is pregnant, and that means that her and his father and Abuelos has to be hiding something very important from him. He wanted to be angry and shout. He wanted to slap all of them, and indeed, he was more angry than he had ever felt before, but he did not yell and he did not scream for them to stop talking. He only thought about how they might be hiding something from him now and that his mother might be dead. And that is why they were going to the hospital, that she might be dead already and he would never ever see her smile again and feel her hug. That she might be dying right now, and Abuelos tricked him into being angry with her now, so that the last time she was alive, angels would tell her that her son was angry with her. It would break her heart. It could be why she dies. Or she could be dying and they are bringing him to see her for the last time because she knew that she would not be long and would want to see him one last time and would want him to see her one last time. Abuela stopped talking when Abuelo tapped her and motioned to the back seat. He had seen in the rear view as Manny began to silently whimper. Tears of frustration and anger and fear rolled carefully and continually down his cheeks and were unchecked by attention from Abuelos until now. When Manny saw Abuela turn her ample frame in the seat in an attempt to reach back to him, he squirmed out of her reach behind the driver's seat, and his cries were silent no longer. The sounds he did not realize were his own, for the first 3 breaths filled the car, wailing that hurt his ears as his eyes drenched his face and his sinuses filled to overflowing. All the pressure on his face gave him the sensation of flames on his skin, and he remembers wondering who was making that terrible shrieking sound. At last he was brought back from the dark recesses of his own fears and frustration and anger. A powerful quaking that shook the vehicle more so than the engine and the tires across the road. A low guttural growl brought to voice by powerful lungs moved hurricanes worth of air in an overbearing rumble and rasp that would be the envy of thunder for all time. Manny looked at his grandmother as she covered her ears and looked at her husband, seeking relief. The shout from Abuelo ceased, and he looked at his wife as she wore an expression both shocked and impressed. He glanced at her and said, "Es bueno que llora, pero necesito para conducir."